Now that we've got this positional data, key to the efficient operation of a permanent magnet motor is determining where to position the carrot, i.e. the stator, with respect to the donkey, i.e. the rotor. As we learned, optimal torque is achieved at 90 degrees. However, this first method applies it inside a range that includes 90. For the single pole pair per phase stator example, consider the stator divided into 6 60-degree sections. Given a specific location, let's say when the rotor is pointed at 210 degrees and it's supposed to be rotating clockwise, the controller establishes a stator field not at a relative 90 degrees from this, but rather a relative 120 degrees from this, or 210 plus 120, or 330 degrees. You may ask, why 120 degrees? Why not 90 degrees, like you just said? Hold on, let me explain. The reason it's not 90 is because when the stator field leads by 120, the rotor moves towards it, and the relative angle between the stator and the rotor becomes less and less, eventually becoming 90, where torque peaks. As the rotor continues to rotate towards the stator, the relative angle between the rotor and stator continues to decrease and torque drops off. Somewhere around a rotor position at 270 degrees, the rotor and stator are offset by a relative 60 degrees. The shaft encoder recognizes the full 60-degree positional change, and the control system de-energizes the stator magnetic field at 330 degrees and re-energizes it at 30 degrees, i.e. 120 relative degrees from the present position of 270 degrees. The rotor continues to turn in the clockwise direction. That relative angle goes from 120 through 90 to 60 degrees, and once the rotor reaches 330 degrees, the shaft encoder recognizes the full 60-degree positional change, the controller de-energizes the stator at 30 degrees, and the stator poles at 90 degrees are energized, and the sequence repeats itself. I'd keep drawing this, but I ran out of room, and hopefully you get the picture. If you want to think of it this way, the carrot, rather than stand at fixed optimal distance from the donkey, instead waves back and forth through the optimal range, relative 120 to relative 90 to relative 60, then it's pushed back out to 120 degrees again, the sequence repeats itself. Keeping the stator inside that relative range from 120 to 60 degrees yields what's known as torque ripple. Long story short, including positional data about the rotor in the control scheme ensures torque remains near optimal and the rotor has less of a possibility of losing synchronization. As an extreme simplification of the control system, one can think of the controller evaluating an if-then scenario and feeding this information back to the inverter. If the rotor is presently in step 1 and in clockwise mode, the optimal stator position is step 3, and the inverter applies step 3. If the rotor moves to step 2 and is still in clockwise mode, the optimal stator position is step 4, and the inverter applies step 4, and so on. I'll come back to revisit this if-then evaluation in a moment, because it has far more implications than you might initially suspect. Lastly, I should mention there exist sensorless control schemes that, rather than using a shaft encoder as illustrated, instead use the counter-electromotive force generated of the windings I mentioned earlier as an equivalent means of measuring rotor position. This is a bit of a misnomer since a sensorless system still necessitates voltage and current sensors in the stator. However, this method does free the system from having to use positional sensors and the task of you replacing these expensive, fragile sensors not if, but rather when they break or fail. Moving on, let's now discuss voltage magnitude. As we discussed earlier, the frequency-dependent inductive reactance of the stator windings necessitates lower voltage be applied at lower excitation frequencies and higher voltage be applied at higher excitation frequencies to keep current manageable. One solution to this is to use a variable magnitude DC source with volts per hertz control as previously discussed. Low voltage at low excitation frequencies, high voltage at high excitation frequencies, problem solved. Another way would be use a fixed AC source and a 3-phase thyristor rectifier that can produce variable DC from fixed AC. As previously, low voltage at low excitation frequencies, high voltage at high excitation frequencies, problem solved. Still another way is to use a fixed DC source and turn the inverter on and off at high switching frequencies such that the effective voltage seen by the stator is the average of these voltage pulses. I am, of course, referring to pulse width modulation, often abbreviated as PWM. An analogy might explain PWM best for those new to this topic. Consider a class with 4 exams, of which you score 100% on the first, 100 on the second, 100 on the third, and skip out on the fourth to compete in a pig wrestling contest and get 0%. A resulting average for this class is 75%. Even though you got 100% on the first 3 exams, you got a 0 on the 4th. Similarly, what's the average when you get 100% on the first, 0 on the second, 100 on the third, and 0 on the 4th? This is an average of 50%. Finally, consider the average when you get 100% on the first exam and a 0 on the second, third, and 4th exam, right when your pig wrestling career is really taking off. This is an average of 25% and you fail the class. This is pulse width modulation. Applications of full or 100% voltage interspersed with applications of no or 0% voltage, such that an average value is observed at the outputs. What if you needed low voltage with a stator magnetic field oriented at 330 degrees? You'd alternately close Q1 for 10 microseconds and open it for 30 microseconds at a 25% duty cycle and keep Q5 closed. The U and V windings essentially split 25% of the applied voltage. Need higher voltage with the stator magnetic field oriented at 330 degrees? Alternately close Q1 for 20 microseconds and open it for 20 microseconds at a 50% duty cycle and keep Q5 closed. The U and V windings essentially split 50% of the applied voltage. Need an even higher voltage with the stator magnetic field oriented at 330 degrees? Alternately close Q1 for 30 microseconds and open it for 10 microseconds at a 75% duty cycle and keep Q5 closed. The U and V windings essentially split 75% of the applied voltage. One can do the same for other desired stator positions, changing or modulating the pulse widths, hence the name, to achieve the desired average voltage output at a desired stator position. You note in this application, we're just keeping the bottom negative switch, in this case Q5, closed, and modulating the duty cycle of the top positive switch, in this case Q1. For obvious reasons, this is called 3-phase, 6-step, 120-degree pulse width modulation with high side switching, since the state of the top positive switch, Q1, alone determines the resultant average, whereas Q5 just provides a return path when Q1 closes. Alternate implementations known as 3-phase, 6-step, 120-degree pulse width modulation with low side switchings exist, where the top positive switches are held closed and the bottom negative switches are modulated. These methods cut down on the coordination necessary if you had to simultaneously modulate both positive and negative switches. For this particular lecture, I'll be using 3-phase, 6-step, 120-degree pulse width modulation with high side switching, as illustrated in this example. So now we got it, right? Positional data about the rotor and a means of applying variable voltage. Let's end this lecture and go wrestle some pigs. Not so fast. Something interesting happened along the way that really changed how this motor operates. Go back to positional data. As we previously discussed, if the motor is in clockwise mode and if the rotor is at step 1, then the ideal location for the stator is step 3. If the rotor moves to 2, then the ideal location for the stator is 4. If the rotor is at 3, then stator 5. If rotor 4, then stator 6, and so on. So if the optimal stator position is dependent upon the rotor present position, think about what's controlling the rotational speed of the rotor. It's not the excitation frequency anymore, but rather something else. Consider this scenario using the if-then evaluation. What happens if the motor is rolling along in the clockwise direction 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, with a stator position optimally for these rotor positions, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, and then the rotor suddenly experiences an increase in oppositional torque such that it momentarily slows and pauses in step 4. Using the if-then evaluation, when the rotor is at 4, the ideal location for the stator is 6. If the rotor slowly drags through the 4 range, rather than speeding ahead as would our previous system without positional feedback, the stator stays at the optimal step 6 location, and only when the rotor crosses over to step 5 does the stator move to 1 and the cycle repeats itself. Dig? When the rotor slowed, so did the stator. It's like the stator, upon seeing the rotor gassing out and lagging behind, is like, don't worry, dummy. I'll wait up for you till you get here. Using positional feedback, the rotor doesn't lose synchronization. This being said, lacking speed control, as torque increases, the rotor slows down. That makes sense. The if-then evaluation also works if the rotor experiences a sudden decrease in oppositional torque and starts moving faster. If it's 1, then 2, then 3, then suddenly 4, 5, 6, because the load drops off, the inverter's like, oh, now you want to speed up. Let's speed up. and applies the optimal stator positions 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, again so the rotor doesn't lose synchronization. This being said, lacking speed control as torque decreases, the rotor speeds up. Again, makes sense. But wait, that's not all. This is the point in the lecture where I need you to take a leap of faith. Not quite the leap we all had to take in Superior Spider-Man when it turns out Dr. Octopus was inside Peter Parker's body for more than 30 issues. That still blows my mind. But a leap nonetheless. So, if as we demonstrated, the next stator position is dependent on the rotor present position, this means excitation frequency and thus rotational speed is tied back to present position. What property is actually controlling speed? Think about what might slow the rotor down or speed it up. Of course, referring to torque. Recall our first example when the rotor is rolling along the clockwise direction 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and it starts dragging its feet in 4 because there's an increase in oppositional torque. How could one overcome oppositional torque? Perhaps by increasing output torque. Output torque, as you recall, is a current-dependent phenomenon. More current yields more resultant torque. What increases current? Perhaps you're acquainted with Ohm's law, which demonstrates increased voltage yields increased current, which yields increased torque. When torque increases, the rotor moves to the next position with greater ease. Take a moment for the implications of this to sink in. Higher voltage yields higher current, which yields higher torque, and the rotor moves to the next position with greater ease, and the rotor speeds up. Forget the chain of causality and eliminate all the middlemen. Voltage controls speed. Otto Octavius's mind is inside Peter Parker's body. Heavy, right? This means a permanent magnet motor employing this type of control using positional feedback to determine the next stator state. It's not excitation frequency that's directly controlling rotational speed, but rather voltage, specifically the duty cycle of the pulse width modulation, which affects average voltage. Thus, we have a device that behaves very similar to a traditional DC motor, where resultant voltage magnitude directly influences speed. Because of these similarities, you will often, but not always, hear this referred to as a brushless DC motor, where this configuration would include a DC to AC inverter driving the stator using a 3-phase, 120-degree pulse width modulation or trapezoidal control with positional feedback from the rotor. To increase speed at a specific operating point, an operator would increase the pulse width modulation duty cycle, thus the resultant average voltage. Conversely, due to decreased speed, an operator would decrease the duty cycle. To reverse rotational direction, an operator would reverse the switching sequence. These are the essential characteristics of a brushless DC motor you need to know. Now, I know some of you might be let down by this because we haven't yet discussed closed-loop speed control. We simply don't have a lot of time for that now, but in the interest of making you happy, here's the briefest of previews of this topic. Consider a plot of rotational speed as a function of torque. At a given duty cycle of, let's say, 25%, as torque increases, the motor slows down. Makes sense. Similarly, at an increased duty cycle of 50%, as torque increases, the motor slows down. Same thing at an increased duty cycle of 75%, and as torque increases, the motor slows down. It makes sense. Given the linear relationship of torque and current, any increase in voltage increases current, which increases torque. So now, consider some operating point at a 50% duty cycle with a specific oppositional torque and a specific speed. Let's say you wanted to keep that speed constant. That's our set point. If the rotor suddenly experiences an increase in oppositional torque, the rotor slows down. The actual speed is less than the set point. The controller recognizes the set point and the actual speed are different and starts increasing the duty cycle of the pulse width modulation signal such that the voltage increases and speed stabilizes at the desired value. This also works in reverse. If there's a drop in oppositional torque, the controller recognizes the rotor's actual speed is greater than the set point, and it can decrease the duty cycle of the pulse width modulated signal such that voltage decreases and the speed again stabilizes at the desired value. We'll examine closed-loop, proportional, integral, and derivative control of electromechanical systems in much later lectures.